A young woman missing without trace 6,000 miles from home.
All I remember hearing was her just saying, "Lucy, missing," and she was absolutely hysterical.
A family's desperate battle to find their daughter.
I couldn't really understand. I was thinking, why are they looking for Lucy's body? Lucy must be alive somewhere.
And the dramatic search that led police to a killer and rapist.
This man was a serial offender. He had been violating and raping women for years and years.
In early May 2000, Lucie Blackman left her home in this quiet street in Kent for the last time. She was 21 years old, and like so many other young people of her age, she was looking forward to travelling and seeing more of the world before settling down.
I didn't want her to go at all. I just had this gut feeling, I can't explain it, but I just felt something dreadful was going to happen to her. I did express that to her and to my friends and family, and she kept saying to me, "Mummy, Mummy, you know, I'll be fine, I'll take great care of myself."
Lucie was an experienced traveller, having worked as an air hostess for British Airways. But the constant flying had left her exhausted, and Lucie had quit. As the new millennium dawned, she and close friend Louise Phillips agreed on a new plan.
She wanted to break away from home and the family and go on a bit of a trip, and this was the option that had been presented, to go to Japan, and she wanted to go and earn some serious money and pay off some of the debts that she'd got.
Lucie's destination was Tokyo. The neon-lit, overcrowded metropolis was in stark contrast to her home in Kent.
So where are you off to today?
She and Louise gravitated to a lively district, popular with Westerners.
Roppongi basically is one of the entertainment districts in Tokyo. Generally speaking, it's frequented mainly by Westerners or foreigners, and Japanese people who want to, you know, interact with those people.
With its hundreds of bars and clubs, Roppongi provided plenty of work for foreign girls. Lucie was soon emailing home to say she had found work in the Casablanca club.
As I said, I'm really, you know, what are you doing? She said, "Oh, I'm hostessing," in the emails, and I was just like, that sounds really dodgy. And she was like, "No, no, it's fine, it's fine. There's, you go," and she sort of told me how it works. You go and have a drink with a customer, and you just talk to them. And you're just there for company, and you get paid in relation to how many customers request you. And she said, "You get the odd dodgy one." She said, "But, you know, I know how to handle them, so don't worry."
It's like a white geisha. There is a lot of kudos to being seen with a beautiful Western girl, but it's all totally innocent. And I think something that's very, very important to understand is it is absolutely not prostitution.
All she had to do was just listen to Japanese men talking about really boring things, and she said, in a way, it was like being an air hostess, but without the altitude.
Part of Lucie's job was to meet customers for dinner dates before her shift began. In hostess clubs, such dates are known as dohans.
They encourage hostesses to entertain clients for dinner and then bring them to the club. So you might go for dinner at 7 o'clock and you'll be in the club by 9.
At the Casablanca club, where Lucie worked, girls would be sacked if they didn't arrange enough dohans.
I think she made a comment at some point about there being like a scoreboard, a list, who was doing the best and who wasn't doing so great. And she, at that time, she wasn't doing that well. And she was very anxious about it because obviously she wanted to earn some money. She didn't want to lose the job. She wanted to stay working in the same bar with Louise. That was the whole point of being there together.
Lucie and the other hostesses were watched over by the Mama-san, whose job it was to keep an eye on who they were meeting and bringing into the club.
I said, you know, you will be careful, won't you? And she said, oh, Mummy, it's perfectly right. The Mama-san knows who I'm going out with, and they're regulars to the club. And she said, you know, and then I just walked to the restaurant, and then we walked to the... so there was no sort of going in cars or anything like that.
But Lucie's next Dohan would be her last. Just 8 weeks after arriving in Tokyo, Lucie got ready to see a customer she had met at the club.
Is anyone else coming? No, it's just going to be us two.
This is the account of her friend, Louise Phillips.
She had agreed to meet this man for a coffee, but she said she'd only be an hour.
Bye, have a good time. I will do. Bye.
Just before 5 p.m, Lucie rang Louise to say she'd met her date. It was a hot afternoon, and Lucie said he was driving her to the coast.
Look, I'll call you later. Okay, bye.
Hey, how are you getting on? Lucie called me again at about 7:15 and then said she was just leaving. She said she had a good time and that you'd given her a mobile phone.
Okay.
Okay. Are you going to be back in time for tonight? We were going out together that evening and she said she'd be back by
Fine.
8 o'clock. Okay, cool. So you'll be back within an hour, definitely.
Yes. All right, bye-bye.
It was the last time anyone heard from Lucie. Over the next 2 days, Louise grew increasingly alarmed. Then, early on Monday evening, she got a call from a Japanese man.
Lucie?
May I speak to Louise Phillips, please?
This is Louise.
Lucy can't talk to you at the moment.
He spoke really good
She's been
English.
studying
He said Lucy was okay, but she joined a new religious group and she wouldn't be coming home.
Please, can you put me on the phone to Lucie?
I kept asking to speak to Lucy, but he just hung up.
Look, she doesn't want to see anyone.
Hello? Hello?
At home in Kent, Lucie's mother was wrapping up a parcel to send to her daughter in Japan.
It was 12:30, sort of lunchtime-ish, and I had literally just parcelled up the shoes and the sweets, and I was literally just going out the door to walk to the post office to send it, and the phone went.
Hello? Why, Louise?
There was just this hysterical voice on the other end, and all I remember hearing was her just saying, Lucie, missing, and she was absolutely hysterical.
What's the matter?
And then, as she said that, my legs just buckled, and I just said, Louise, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to go because I'm going to be sick.
Sorry.
Lucie's disappearance would spark a desperate search that exposed the dark side of Tokyo's nightlife, a search that would lead to the capture of one of Japan's most notorious criminals. On a hot Saturday in July 2000, Lucie Blackman disappeared while on a date with a man she'd met at a Tokyo nightclub. In the days that followed, the lack of contact with her family was wildly out of character.
She and I were very, very close, and she used to, you know, when she was working, she'd phone me up all the time and ask me things like, you know, what should I have for lunch today, Mummy?
Lucie was the eldest of 3 children. When her parents divorced, she, her sister Sophie and brother Rupert all lived with their mother in Kent.
I was just so thrilled when she was born, and I just couldn't believe that she was, you know, my baby, and she was a very, very happy little girl. She was very bubbly. She was like instant sunshine. She was like a little butterfly. She just had this presence.
She's light up a room. She's full of energy, absolutely. She always planned everything, all the trips she did as an air hostess. She would have her little notes about everything she needed to take with her and pack. And for Japan, it was so out of character for her.
In the days following Lucie's disappearance, her family and friends back in England grew increasingly anxious.
You worry and you're frightened, but you're like, no, she's going to be fine. She's just going to turn up any minute now. She's just got lost or something. She'll turn up.
That's nearly 2 days ago.
Jane was just on the phone the whole time, trying to find out the details, what's going on, what do you mean she's gone missing, how has she gone missing, you know, just trying to frantically find out, you know, what's going on.
Yes, I phoned them.
I just really didn't know what to do. I phoned up my brother and I phoned different people up, but you don't really know what to do.
Yes, could I speak to someone in the embassy, please?
I think if she'd gone missing in England, then you can phone the police up. When your daughter goes missing in Japan, who do you phone up? It's very difficult knowing what to do.
There must be someone there that I can speak to.
Lucie had vanished in one of the world's busiest cities.
Look, she doesn't want to see anyone.
Hello?
The only
Hello?
lead was the mysterious Japanese caller who'd claimed she had run off to join a religious group.
At that point, we thought she's been kidnapped. She's locked up in some strange cult thing, because there's no way she'd go willingly. Right, let's go out there and get her back. We'll march out there, we'll find her, and we'll drag her out. And we honestly believed that we could do that.
Lucie Blackman was just 20, but she was determined to fly out to Tokyo immediately and bring her sister home.
I think in her wonderful innocence, I think she thought she was going to walk down the street and see this blonde girl and go, there we are, there's Lucie. I mean, you know, that's what I think she felt that she was going to do.
Lucie's ex-boyfriend, Jamie, offered to travel with Sophie. Within 24 hours, they arrived in Tokyo and saw how daunting the task of finding her might be.
It was just really, really foreign. I mean, it's such a big place. It's just condensed into such a small area. Like, you're on highways that are like 50 foot in the air, going over buildings. You know, you go to Europe, you go to places in the world, and, you know, you can half get away with speaking English, really. You go to Japan and you just... I mean, you've got two different types of alphabet. Like, our hands were tied, really. There was only so much we could do.
But more frustrating was the attitude of the Japanese police.
They just didn't really seem to be that bothered. And it was just a sad situation, because I just didn't feel we was getting anywhere. Every day that just goes by and you're just there twiddling your thumbs.
A week on, they'd found no new clues.
So I felt like I'd failed. And I just felt useless.
I got Sophie ringing me from Tokyo saying, you know, I go to the police station every day, Daddy, and they just say, you know, go away, Lucie's over 21, she can go missing if she likes. You know, Sophie managed to get her listed as a missing person on a postcard, which went in a vast file of missing persons, but that's all that we could get done.
But publicity would soon inject the investigation with new urgency. British reporters spotted a short article about Lucie in a Japanese newspaper.
It was a very small story, simply saying that a British tourist, unnamed, a 21-year-old woman, had gone missing, and that her family were anxious about her whereabouts and looking for her. But within 2 or 3 days, it became clear that there was a lot more to this, and the story quickly escalated into one of the biggest of that summer.
Lucie was working as a hostess in this nightclub to try and raise money to continue.
But there's been persistent speculation that Lucie may have been kidnapped by a cult.
She hasn't been seen for almost 2 weeks now. The only clue to her whereabouts, a call to one of her friends from a man...
Lucie's father, Tim, arrived in Tokyo determined to stoke the press attention further. Within a fortnight of Lucie's disappearance, she was headline news.
I'm sure you'll appreciate this is my sister who's missing, and I just want her to come home.
Sophie and I spent every night trying to think, well, how are we going to get Lucie on primetime television in the morning? And, you know, we'd call a press conference at 5 o'clock in the morning and these guys would turn up and sure enough, Lucie was back on the front page. I don't think we were confident that the police were going to be the people who would suddenly find her in a warehouse in northern Tokyo somewhere and bring her back to us. We felt it would be a tip-off from the public.
The family's press campaign won support from Tokyo's close-knit community of British expats.
I was in a restaurant, and Tim was in there with Sophie. And I called him aside and just said, look, whilst you're here, you're going to need logistical help. I said, you're going to need offices, you're going to need, you know, telephone lines, faxes, internet. You're basically going to need to set this up as an office to stand any chance of succeeding.
Tim set up a base in Hugh's office and, crucially, a dedicated phone line for information from the public.
Many calls came in to the hotline which they set up, but a lot of them were red herrings, or they were people trying to be helpful who just got the wrong end of the stick. And for a long time, Tim and Sophie really had no idea what had happened to Lucie.
It's more than 2 weeks since Tim Blackman launched his campaign to find his missing daughter. As yet, he's heard absolutely nothing and admits he's becoming increasingly desperate.
As British people, we're surprised and upset that such a terrible thing could happen to our child in Japan.
As their publicity campaign intensified, the Blackmans recruited as many high-profile people as possible. Tim persuaded the then Prime Minister Tony Blair to lobby the Japanese government, and Richard Branson put out a TV appeal.
I'm here today to ask for your help.
All of which put pressure on the Japanese authorities.
So the message was coming down to the police from the Japanese Prime Minister, you know, we've got to sort this out.
The police finally agreed to pour more resources into the case, assigning 80 officers to the hunt for Lucie. But if the family were hoping that they'd get more information from detectives, they were wrong.
Police wouldn't tell Tim what they were doing because they didn't want to give away details of their investigation.
They would be very nice to us and they would smile and shake our hands and all the rest of it, but by the same token, they wouldn't really tell us anything about anything in particular, and we would ask about it and they would say, well, we don't know.
Lucie's mother was concerned that the Japanese police weren't following up on vital information and that precious time was being lost.
Well, I was suggesting things like, you know, that she had a mobile phone. Could they track that down? And could they track, you know, where, if there was any cameras about, could they see where she'd been and everything? And they just sort of said, you know, we can't answer that question. And it was frustrating. It was very frustrating.
Then, in August, as the search entered its second month, the police received a letter written in English and signed from Lucie. The signature was a crude forgery, but the letter gave the family hope that she was still alive and being held against her will.
There was always the possibility that we would find her alive. They were talking about the sex trade, and she might have been shipped away and she would have been made into a heroin addict to be controlled, and I think we thought we'd find her in a terrible condition somewhere, a terrible state.
Despite the letter, the police appeared no nearer to tracking down Lucie or her abductor. Her increasingly frustrated mother turned to a British private detective for help.
The first thing was to suss out the club, suss out the witnesses, how many, where were they still willing to talk to me. I felt the club was particularly, it was the hub to this investigation, and given the fact that she had disappeared with a client, surely somebody could have recalled what he looked like. Did anybody else know him? Did the club know him? She would have asked the club, Mama-san. A huge number of people, I would have thought, should have had information about who she left with and who this guy might have been.
One hostess, called Melissa, did come forward. She described a man she had seen in the club with Lucie just days before her disappearance.
I went back to my old colleagues in Scotland Yard and I got their photo imaging people to build up a photo fit from a description given by Melissa, a hostess who'd been there the last night Lucie had worked there. But I felt that was something the Japanese police could have done earlier.
The former detective went from club to club with the likeness. He was unable to identify the suspect, but he was right to focus on the nightclub. Several Western girls working in Roppongi's Hostess bars had by now phoned the Blackmans' hotline. All told disturbing stories of being taken on a date or dohan by the same man.
I was hearing stories from club managers, for example, who had said that one of his girls had been on a dohan with him and had come back 2 days later and was so seriously sick and ill. She'd obviously been attacked in some way, and he'd taken her to the police station and the police had wanted nothing to do with it at all.
I knew a couple of girls that it had happened to, and there was a pattern developing. This man was taking them out on a dohan, drugging them and raping them.
The attacker always gave the girls a false name, but their description of him was consistent.
He was a very well-dressed, apparently very wealthy man. He spoke English well. He was quite charming. In most cases, as young women in Japan working illegally as hostesses, not speaking any Japanese, they just left it at that, wrote it down to experience. But these stories at the time were of course very compelling, because this was the kind of scenario in which you could imagine Lucie had gone missing.
Lucie's family passed all this information on to the Japanese police. It gave them the lead they needed. By October, they'd identified a prime suspect.
As the months have passed, hopes of finding Lucie Blackman alive have faded, but the Tokyo police say they've now arrested a man who could be connected to her disappearance.
Yoki Obara, who's 48, was driven away from his home at high speed.
The Blackman family's determination to find their daughter had led detectives to a wealthy playboy named Joji Obara. They charged him with raping 5 women who had worked in hostess bars.
I didn't really link him enormously with the fact that Lucie had gone missing, but I probably couldn't accept the idea that somebody had done what he had, as it turned out, done.
Police were about to uncover a chilling picture of a rapist and killer whose crimes had gone undetected for almost a decade.
They found a large number of videos of himself having sex with unconscious drugged women.
He really was a serial rapist. The man was a deviant of the highest order.
But would he lead police to Lucie? In Japan, the search for Lucie Blackman had led police to 48-year-old Joji Obara. A regular in Tokyo's nightclubs, he'd been preying on hostesses for years.
They found in his apartment a large number of videos which he had taken of himself having sex with unconscious drugged women.
This man was a serial offender. He had been violating and raping women for years and years.
Joji Obara was the son of a Korean immigrant who had made a vast fortune in property and gambling.
He was educated at university. He learned how to speak English well. He had a variety of cars. He had a variety of family apartments. He was a serial good-time guy who could afford to go around all these clubs and certainly was well known on the club circuit.
Though his face was familiar on the hostess club scene, Obara was careful to conceal his true identity, often giving out false names.
But he always kept a very low profile. He never offered anyone a business card, which is usually standard practice in Japan.
Obara had a routine. He would meet hostesses in a club and invite them on a date or dohan. He'd pick them up in one of his luxury cars and shower them with gifts. But then he'd reveal his true face.
And his method was quite simple. He would induce young women to come back with him to his flat. He would make them unconscious, and then he would strip them naked, and then he would violate them in most dreadful ways. And he would film himself doing that. And the man was a deviant of the highest order.
When they searched through his apartment, police found as many as 200 tapes on which he was seen raping different women.
He's alleged to have been a regular client of the bar where Lucie Blackman worked as a hostess.
Police who've also searched Ibarra's home say this is their first positive lead since she went missing 4 months ago.
Detectives began questioning Ibarra over Lucie's disappearance, but he vehemently denied ever having met her. Then, after 4 weeks in custody, he suddenly changed his story. Once again, Lucie's family returned to Japan to help the inquiry.
In the first instance, Ibarra swore he never knew about Lucie, he never met her, he knew nothing of her other than what had been in the media. But obviously he's released a statement which now says that he has met Lucie, met her once. We're beginning to think that the longer he is interviewed by the police, the more information he's going to volunteer.
But Ibarra didn't tell the police anything else. With the search for Lucie now in its 5th month, the police needed more information. So her father, Tim, made an international appeal.
It's become apparent that we are very much in need of more information to come forward. And in particular, we would like girls who used to work in the Roppongi, who now have gone home, if they know of this man or whether they've experienced a similar abduction, it's vitally important that they come forward.
The appeal worked. Among those who came forward was a man with vital new information. The case against Ibarra was about to become even stronger.
In Australia, a young man named Robert Finnegan read about this, and it struck him very powerfully because he, 8 years earlier in 1992, he'd been the fiancé of a young woman called Carita Ridgway. And when these stories started coming out of Japan of a rapist who drugged his female hostess victims, this rang a very alarming bell.
Carita Ridgway was an aspiring actress. Just 21 years old, she had taken work as a hostess in Tokyo to pay for her studies. Carita had gone on a dohan with a customer. When she returned, she was seriously ill.
She was taken to hospital, she fell unconscious, and a few days later she died of liver failure. The explanation at the time had been that she had died of natural causes, but Robert Finnegan had never quite been able to believe that.
Credit to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police that they linked the two cases and re-investigated Carita's case and then found evidence directly linking Ibarra to Carita's death.
When police reviewed the videotapes found in Ibarra's apartment, they found one showing Carita unconscious on his bed. Bit by bit, they were able to piece together what had happened. After meeting Carita on a date, Ibarra had taken her back to one of his apartments. There, he had given her a drink laced with sedatives. Later, he filmed his attack on her while using chloroform to keep her sedated. In high concentration, chloroform is toxic. It was this that killed her. Ibarra, already accused of 5 rapes, was now charged with killing the young hostess. The police case against Ibarra was compelling, but by the end of 2000, they still had no evidence linking him to the disappearance of Lucie Blackman. January 2001, Lucie had been missing for 6 months. In England, her family was still clinging to the hope that she may still be alive. In Japan, the search for Lucie was about to come to a tragic end.
In the past few days and weeks, this beach has been the focus of police investigators' attention.
Early in February, in one of the coldest times of the year, when they were on the verge of giving up, they found in a seaside cave close to one of Giorgio Ibarra's apartments a series of packages buried not very far under the sand. And when they dug them up, the packages, sure enough, contained a dismembered body cut into 8 parts.
This was the outcome the Blackman family had feared, the discovery of a woman's remains. They were found hidden in a cave.
They finally phoned me a few hours later saying that the body that they had discovered on the beach definitely was Lucie's. that the head was encased in concrete and that they'd chipped the concrete away and found all her blonde hair, and they'd already had her dental records on hand, and that it was a positive identification. So I was just completely devastated.
It was just awful. It was awful. And we just all sat there crying, and it was just the worst thing, because it'd been so long, the going on, you know, months and months and months, and then the realisation that, you know, she was dead, the horrific way in which her body was found, and the reality that, you know, you'd never see her again.
Lucie's devastated family returned to Japan once more. Her father and sister visited the beach where her body was found 7 months after she disappeared. Jane had the heartbreaking task of bringing her daughter home.
I have to sign documents to enable the body of my beloved daughter Lucie to be released so that I can take her home and arrange for her funeral to be carried out with the dignity she so deserves. It was just awful. It's all these things that you never think you're going to have to do. I mean, you always think, as a mother, that the biggest thing that's going to happen in life is a wedding. So to plan a fairy tale funeral is not what you have in mind.
The service was a fitting tribute to Lucie.
As Lucie was buried, Japanese police brought their charges against Obara. The abduction and the rape leading to death of Lucie Blackman. By now, they'd charged him with 9 other rapes and the death of Carita Ridgway.
The conviction rate for serious crimes in Japan is something like 99.9%. And that's partly because almost all criminal defendants confess. And so it's an open and shut case when it comes to court.
But in July 2001, Joji Obara pleaded not guilty to all charges. It marked the start of a 7-year legal battle.
Lucie Blackman's father and sister arriving at a Tokyo courthouse where they'd come face to face for the first time with the man accused of killing her.
As Lucie's family listened in court, details of her final hours unfolded. On a hot Saturday in July at around 4 p.m, Lucie went to see a man she had met at the Hostess bar where she worked. That man was Joji Obara. An hour later, she rang her friend Louise to say they were on their way to the coast.
Oh, okay. Are you going to be back in time for tonight? Oh, good.
I suspect that he seduced Lucie in the sense that he took her there, promising her dinner, a phone, a bottle of champagne. And this man clearly practiced it to such an extent that a huge amount of vulnerable and normally non-naive women followed him.
Later that afternoon, a Japanese couple saw Lucie and Obara together in the seaside resort of Zushi.
They had seen Lucie in a little park somewhere, and it was in the latter part of the afternoon.
Police confirmed the sighting when they found a camera in Obara's flat. On it was a picture of Lucie taken on the beach in Zushi.
The police were able to identify precisely where Lucie was standing and precisely where Obara was standing in order to take the photograph. They were able to look at the tides and the weather patterns, and they were able to identify very, very precisely the actual moment that Lucie was in that location.
Police later did a fingertip search of Obara's apartment in Zushi, finding several blonde hairs. They were soon able to identify them.
I had this phone call in the early hours. They wanted me to go into Lucie's bedroom and take fingerprints in her room. and they wanted me to send some of my nail clippings and also some of my hair.
DNA from the sample sent by Jane was matched to the blonde hairs found in the flat. And police uncovered further compelling evidence linking Ibarra with Lucie.
Hi Louise, it's me.
Using mobile phone records, they were able to trace the pair's movements.
Yep.
It was here that Lucie made the final call to her friend, Louise, telling her she was heading home.
I'm on my way back, and I'll be back within the hour. Okay?
The geography of where the calls were made pinpointed Lucie as being where he was.
In court, Ibarra finally admitted having spent the day with Lucie. He said they'd had dinner at his apartment, but he insisted that Lucie then left without him.
He denied having anything to do with her death. He said that he'd taken Lucie to his apartment.
Thank you very much.
They'd had a few drinks, and he claimed, although this has always been denied as a libel by everyone who knows her, he claimed that she'd been taking illegal drugs. He said that she was high on drugs, and that at some point he had called a fixer to come and collect her and take her home.
This person was named, but he was unable to attend court because he had died.
May I speak to Louise Phillips, please?
This is Louise.
Police were able to prove it was Ibarra who'd called Lucie's friend, claiming she'd joined a religious cult.
I want to talk to Lucie.
Look, she doesn't want to see anyone.
He had later interfered with the investigation by sending police the hoax letter in which Lucie apparently asked to be left alone. Draft copies of the letter with Lucie's forged signature were found in his apartment. He maintained his innocence on all charges.
They had absolute evidence that Lucie had gone with Ibarra, had gone to this location, had been at this place, but there was nothing that could absolutely say that this man did this to this girl, which killed her.
There was no smoking gun, there was no direct evidence linking Giorgio Ibarra to Lucie's body. There were no DNA samples, there was no sperm or blood, for example, or something that could be identified as his.
Lucie's family could only wait for the verdict, but before it came, Ibarra would make them an offer that would bitterly divide them.
Evidence about the last known movements of Lucie Blackman. Proceedings have been underway for some time because the defendant is also charged with a number of other offences.
Justice moves slowly in Japan, and 5 years into Joji Ibarra's trial, fresh evidence of his crimes was still emerging. How he'd lured hostesses to his apartment, then raped them, and how he'd used chloroform to sedate and kill Carrie to Ridgeway.
The things we heard, my God, you know, and the details. All the other girls that were hurt and another girl that was killed. It was just like, how can anybody do that to another human being?
Determined to see justice for Lucie, the family repeatedly returned to Tokyo.
Who are having to step back into the nightmare every 6 months or 12 months to relive it and to come here and be where Lucie was.
For Lucie's mother, Jane, attending court was traumatic.
But I was very anxious because I've actually never seen Ibarra, and I was very concerned because I didn't really want to have his face in my memory. But I thought, no, I'm going to do this, and I got there, and then the police came to say that Ibarra wouldn't leave his cell, and that he'd stripped down to his underpants and he was holding onto his basin. And they had tried to get him to come out of the cell, but they couldn't. I was angry because I just thought, you know, he's a coward.
Jane found the Japanese judicial system frustrating, but nothing prepared her for the next development in the slow-moving case, an offer from Ibarra's lawyers made through her second husband.
Jane started to receive phone calls and emails which came via me. There was a presumption, I think, in Japanese culture that me as Jane's husband would be able to persuade her to do what I thought was right.
We'd been out and got home and there was a message on the answer phone which had been left.
We are expecting to talk with Mrs. Stella to talk about some huge amount of money, the 200,000 pounds. 200,000 pounds. The lawyer would like your wife accept this amount.
They were persistent, and the offer was raised from £200,000 sterling to £454,000 sterling. But at no point did Jane ever consider taking any money.
Money offered by O'Bara had already been accepted by the women he had raped. The family of Carita Ridgway had rejected his offer.
In Japanese criminal cases, it's not uncommon for someone who's been accused of a crime to pay money to a victim. It's not compensation. He's very clear about that. He's not compensating for anything because he insists he's done nothing wrong. It's presented as condolence money, an expression of his sympathy, not an expression of his guilt and repentance.
We were told by the prosecutor so many times, under no circumstances should we take any money if we've offered it by O'Bara or anyone relating to O'Bara. And I'd said all along there's no way I would take any money ever, because I just think it's obscene.
Lucie's father, Tim, was also offered the money, but he took a totally different view.
The idea of somebody offering what they're describing as condolence money, we would describe it over here as damages of some sort. You know, people get fined for their crimes, and maybe the fine goes to the state, or in some cases people receive damages for damages that have been perpetrated against them. You know, I don't understand why it's sort of such a complicated issue, really.
Tim accepted the money, a payment of 100 million yen, or £420,000. It was to cause a bitter divide with his ex-wife.
I had been told that it wouldn't affect the outcome of the trial, and I think for me the big thing is that it's not going to make any difference to Lucie at all, and we've got our life to get on with.
I just couldn't believe that he'd done it. You know, knowing that the prosecutor had said so many times not to do it, I just couldn't believe that any parent wanting justice for their child could do that. I just didn't understand it.
In April 2007, with the family still divided over the condolence payment, Lucie's father and sister flew to Tokyo to hear the verdict. Almost 7 years had passed since Lucie had gone missing.
For Tim and Sophie Blackman, the day started out with high expectations, with most people predicting a guilty verdict against Joji O'Bara.
It's very difficult to know that we're going into the court, leaving the decision entirely in someone else's hands, but hopefully we will get the sentence we're wishing for.
The announcement was made within the first few minutes of the court session opening, and there was a massive rush of chairs being pushed back and journalists rushing out of the door.
Jane had waited at home to hear the verdict.
The British Embassy phoned us, and they actually spoke to Roger, because I just thought, I want him to hear it because I won't take it all in. And I just couldn't believe that he'd been acquitted.
After a trial lasting 6 years, Joji O'Bara was cleared on all charges relating to Lucie Blackman. The judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence to prove that he'd been involved in her killing.
Well, we were stunned. I mean, we sat in the court stunned.
I think, you know, when you say someone's broken-hearted, I am broken-hearted. I have a pain there that never goes away.
But O'Bara was found guilty of 9 rapes and the death of Carita Ridgway. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge said the condolence money paid by O'Bara to the women he had raped had made no impact on the verdict.
Tim Blackman, of course, accepted a large sum of money from Borough, and I think that at least the way it should work is that if money is paid, it might have an effect on the sentence, but it doesn't have any effect on deciding whether someone is guilty or innocent.
This year, Ibarra was brought back before the court. The prosecution is appealing against the judge's decision to find him not guilty of Lucie's abduction, rape and killing. Ibarra continues to maintain his innocence. The story of Lucie Blackman could have become just another salutary tale about a young woman who left her home in suburban Britain, went missing abroad and came to a tragic end. But the determination of her family to find her and their relentless campaign to discover the truth led in the end to the capture of a dangerous and predatory criminal.
I think Lucie, in a way of her generosity to other people, in a strange way, Lucie had found justice for Carita and for the 6 women who were part of the trial and for the hundreds of women who weren't part of the trial, who felt they'd received justice. It all came from Lucie.
The family have never been able to find justice for their own daughter.
I miss her hugs, I miss the smell of her, I miss her smile, and I just have to live with it. But it's very hard. It's not the right way round for your child to die before you.
Well, coming up next on ITV4, Michael Caine stars in The Fourth Protocol. And who's the greatest of them all when it comes to flogging hot tubs? The 5 remaining contestants fight it out after the news in Natural Born Cellars.